place to be is living free in Tennessee.
Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Tuesday. It's Tuesday, October 28th, 2025, and this is episode 1093 of Living Free in Tennessee. And as we've mentioned before, it's a Monday show on a Tuesday because all our Monday shows are on a Tuesday for the rest of the time. And I'm going to do this show a little bit differently than I do most Monday shows in that we're not doing our usual segments today. So Tales from the Prepper Pantry, all that jazz, not happening because I wanted to talk about mushrooms. So not the ones you find in the wild, although we will talk about some of those. I want to talk about growing mushrooms at home without losing your mind or causing a big problem for yourself or spending a bunch of money and not growing mushrooms, but also how it relates to business. I've called the show Stop Forcing It, the mushroom lesson. So we're going to talk about why I have started cultivating mushrooms and how it's going to tap into the holler roast waste stream, the objectives of my overall mushroom project, what I've tried and failed at, which is super important for you to hear about, economics so far behind the scenes and behind a small scale grow operation like what I have, which isn't, I'm not even sure I'd call it a grow operation, but hey, let's be confident and call it a grow operation. How I'm cooking the harvest, what I'm doing about my first mold outbreak, and how I plan to reuse every scrap of what the waste stream that comes from the mushrooms is, which I started using in part to address the waste stream, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And what I realized as I was going through these notes is that you don't grow mushrooms, they grow themselves. You make it easy for them to grow themselves by creating the environment that they can grow well in. And when I really started thinking about that on my walk today, I realized, you know what? That's the same for your business. So doesn't mean you don't work hard in your business, right? But really what you're doing is setting up an environment to thrive when you build your business. So apparently it's the time of year when Nicole Sauce nerds out a little bit on some things. So I want to welcome everybody to the live stream. If you have questions or comments, put the word questions or comments in all caps. I'll do my best to work them into today's show. Before we jump into the mushroomy topic of the day, I do want to talk about our featured event, which is on November 15th, right here at the Holler Homestead in Lancaster, Tennessee. That's 1 hour east of Nashville. And we're going to have a farm to table dinner. That's right, a farm to table dinner. I literally, Tactical is across the state picking up things, and I'm hoping he will pick up things that are coming to the dinner specifically. And I'll be talking with Chef, I'm sure, between now and the 15th to finalize what we're building in from a forage standpoint, because we didn't really know what the what the environment was going to be as far as wild edible things. And it's time for us to lock some of the other parts of the dinner. But that's $125 per meal at livingfreeintennessee.com. And you can see a highlight towards the top of my website right now that leads straight to the farm to table dinner. Tickets are on sale through the 9th of November. And then even if we're not sold out, I mean, they're very limited. We will only allow a maximum of 16 people. Once they're sold out, they're sold out. That's the deal. So if they are not sold out by the 9th, then we're sold out anyway, because it's all about head count at that point, right? So we've got a wild edible walk before the dinner starts, and then we have the dinner, and you can come out and enjoy the Base Camp Lodge. Bring your own bottle of wine if you want. We'll have things you can pour wine in, that sort of thing. Anyway, check it out, livingfreeintennessee.com. I also have 2 sponsors to thank. The first sponsor is Discount Mylar Bags. If you want to get quality Mylar bags, if you want to figure out how to size them the way they need to be, there are resources for free on the website, discountmylarbags.com. Toby's put a lot of time and thought into how to preserve food, and then he sources things in bulk and passes on those savings to you. Yes, we have tariffs. Yes, prices are going up. Yes, that damages his business because they're not as cheap as they used to be. But I just priced out Brazil coffee beans, by the way, And we may be changing some of our mixes this year at Hollow Roast Coffee as a result, or prices are going to go up. That's like your two choices as a business owner. Anyway, check out his stuff at discountmylarbags.com. Our second sponsor is Agorist Tax Advice. You can get a free download at agoristaxadvice.com/LFTN. Now, you are giving him your email for that download, but it gives you some basics. So if you're just starting your business right now, download that guide and read it, and it'll tell you about some write-offs that you can take advantage of and how to document them and that sort of thing. You know what? If you're not starting a business, download that guide anyway and read it, because we want to keep more of our money in our pockets. And there is plenty of tax code written that will help us do that perfectly legal. If you decide you want to work with Matthew at agoristaxadvice.com, definitely get yourself a consult. He does not like to work with people he can't help. So he talks to you on the phone first before you spend a bunch of money to then find out it's not a good fit. He wants to be a good fit. That's the kind of person I like to work with. And I can tell you, after working with Matthew, that it actually made me get some financial ducks in a row that are helping me make other decisions for my business. So that's been also, it's been like the side benefit of me doing the work I needed to do anyway, has been that it's easier for me to figure out what parts of my business make money and what parts don't. And then I send it to him and he's like, these are some structural ideas I have for you. These are some write-offs you might not be taking advantage of that you could take advantage of. Here's how you document them. Like, that's a pretty cool tool to have in your back pocket. agoristaxadvice.com/LFTN for the download. And Carson says it's Muse Day, like Monday and Tuesday together. Yeah, it's going to be Muse Day for the rest of the year as we roast all of the coffee orders. I'm kind of excited. So we've I've told you guys on the podcast, but we haven't done the official launch because we didn't know when these were coming in. But the classic coffee tins arrive tomorrow here. And I didn't think they were going to get here till after Jack's, because I leave for Jack's on this weekend. I'll be gone for 10 days at Jack Spirko's fall workshop. And, well, they're going to be here tomorrow, which means I can start shipping them this week before I leave, which means if you want one, you can do it. Once I'm out of town, they're not shipping while I'm gone, and then they'll be back. I'll be back and they'll be shipping because there's some training I need to do for people who help me package coffee that I am confident will not fit in this week. Anyway, that's super exciting for us for the classic coffee tins. And I'm not sure, why did I go off on that? I don't know. It was probably because I was excited and I just heard about it. And then I heard my phone ringing in the background, and you guys just got to experience an ADHD moment with Nicole Sauce. That's right. Oh, he says Muse Day. Muse Day. I like to like muse, like your singing muse, your musical muse, your artistic muse. It's because of the Muse Day from Carson. That comment was kind of funny to me. And then I thought about why it's Muse Day, and that's because Hollow Roast gets busy at this time of year because people give coffee as Christmas gifts. We have a few new things coming out this year, but nothing crazy, but all awesome coffee that you can give to people for Christmas. It does make good gifts. It does. It does. So as I mentioned, we usually do segments about Tales from the Prepper Pantry, the frugality tip from Margot, Operation Independence. Today is basically all about Operation Independence, because back when I started this podcast, I was telling you guys how we make money here. Because if you're going to have a homestead, if you're going to live the life you choose on your terms, if you're going to create that for yourself, it really helps to create an environment of abundance. And when I started this podcast, I was so deeply in debt, I wasn't sure I was going to get out. I'm out. And that's cool. And part of what has helped me on that journey is creating the homestead and what we're doing here with profit in mind. Now, I will transparently share that in the last year and a half, not as profitable as it's been before. And I've made some decisions this year to do more of certain things and less of other things. And some of those other things made me money, because I think in order to enrich myself and enrich the world around me, I need to do a better job at some of the things we do. And that means there's not time for some of the things we now do not do, right? So no has been a really important lesson. So why would I add mushrooms to that list? That seems like an extra thing to do, right? So we're talking about getting started with growing mushrooms at home. And I have approached this project with some specific goals in mind that may be different. But let's talk about why I'm even getting into mushrooms. And think about the tagline of my show: build the life you choose on your terms. I love mushrooms. Let's just start there. Why did I start growing mushrooms? I love mushrooms. I'm really fascinated by them. They're a very interesting fungus, right? Fungus among us. And back when I started my homestead journey, which is 18 years ago now, maybe 19. Well, there's a point where it's 19 and not 18 anymore, right? I was really fascinated with all of the wild things that you can find in the world around you, the wild edibles specifically. And so every time I went on a walk, I was looking at plants and I was looking up plants and does it have an herbal use? Does it have a medicinal like herbal thing? Is it a culinary addition? Is it poisonous? Those sorts of things. And I saw mushrooms all the time and they were something I kind of shied away from because people like the wrap of mushrooms. It's funny. There's a mushroom icon in the comments. Mushrooms are known for killing people, right? Well, and the funny thing is you can kill people with plants too. And there are certain animals that if you eat the wrong part of them will also kill you. Pufferfish, anyone? Or is it blowfish? I don't know. Anyway, that's not that like that super dangerous sushi. Better really trust your sushi guy. Things can kill you. And that doesn't mean go out and start eating random mushrooms, right? But also a lot of mushrooms can be eaten. And so back in those days, really where my mind was I thought, well, I know some mushrooms are edible. It'd be really cool to take a class at some point. But I wasn't taking that class. In fact, I thought I was the only person in the area where I live who even cared about organic, wild, crafted, nutrient-dense food. And I was growing things here as best I could, which honestly at the beginning wasn't that great. And I ended up over time meeting my friend Carly at the farmer's market when I started selling things at the farmer's market. And she also was regeneratively raising food. And she was a wild edible forager. And she was really into mushrooms. And she was a spelunker. But I'll save the cave stories for a totally different episode because we need to focus on the fungi, right? And so what happened was that I had discovered some plants on my own, but as I got to know Carly, she taught me about other plants. In fact, because she had a CSA, and one season it was just like a total weather garden fail. And she was going to refund everybody's money, even though a CSA, the whole purpose is you support the farm and you fail with the farm if the farm fails, right? But she just couldn't bring herself to keep the money. And I remember going out there and saying, okay, because I do business strategy. I was like, you know how to source things in the woods that nobody else knows how to source. And you're going to have to educate people on what they can eat. But I think you could finish out your term with just things that you forage. And she did. And as part of that, because I was a CSA customer, I got to learn about things I didn't know I could eat and how to cook them and all sorts of stuff. And it was a really great, I loved that. I feel like you could do a wild foraged CSA sort of thing or subscription service. And some people like me would really love it. Even if it's not like filling all of your food needs, it could fill some of your food needs. And, it could be anything from right now, there's a lot of tea foraging to be done, but we've also got wild lettuce up and we've also got watercress. And I haven't even looked all that hard out there at what's available. So that would be something you could be doing for people right now, Carrie. Just saying. But I still stayed away from mushrooms. And then one day she had too many oyster mushrooms. She found tons of them, probably 20 or 30 pounds of oyster mushrooms, because oyster mushrooms can really grow when they grow. And she asked me if I wanted to have some. And she brought them out to me. And she's like, this is how you cook them. And I cooked them and they were delicious. And the next day, I'm out on a hike and I see what I think might be oyster mushrooms because I had seen them in person, physically. And this is the thing about identifying wild plants. When you have seen them in person, you've verified they are what they are, you've tested it carefully to make sure you don't have an allergy to them, and you've done all of those things, suddenly you see them everywhere. And they've been all around you the whole time, right? So, that was pretty cool. Don't watch this. They're selling wild chanterelles at the grocer for $35 a pound. Yep. This goes on to the side hustle we're going to talk about in this episode. So I took a picture of them. I harvested them. I sent them to her. I said, "Are these oyster mushrooms?" She said, "Yes." I was really scared of mushrooms. I drove 25 minutes to her house with the mushrooms and said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes." And I gave her some. And then I cooked those mushrooms. And then from that day forward, I was very confident about identifying oyster mushrooms. And part of it was this. Carly sat me down and said, "Listen, that grew on a hardwood log." And I could see that in your picture. So, what else grows on hardwood logs here that looks like that? Nothing poisonous. So, even if it's not a specific variety of oyster, it's clearly an oyster, and you can tell by how the gills are and how they grow in bunches on a hardwood log. Like if you just have one of those growing randomly somewhere weird, you may want to question it. And that made me start on the journey of learning different ways to verify what a mushroom is. And one of the ways is send a picture to somebody who can verify what it is. And if they're not willing to verify, which good mushroom people will not unless they're really sure, that's helpful. But if you can get it in person in front of the person, that's even better. Know what lookalikes there are and if they're poisonous. So if you have something like a shiitake mushroom in Tennessee, you find a shiitake mushroom growing, there are lookalikes that can kill you. So you want to be careful about those, right? And knowing the lookalikes, and it's regionally specific. So what may grow here in Tennessee may be totally different as a lookalike that's potentially poisonous in Russia, in Japan, in the Pacific Northwest. So you want to just look at all of those things, know what they grow in, know if they're, as a polypore, I forget how you say it, like they have little circles versus gills. Do the gills, are they just on the head of the mushroom? Do they go all the way down the stem? There's all these different things. Lots of books you can get about that. So that started me on a mushroom adventure. And over the years, I've found wood ear, dryad saddle. I have found chanterelles. I forgot about those. I've found coral mushrooms. I've found lion's mane. I've found, of course, turkey tail everywhere here. And I have found the cauliflower mushroom, which is one of my favorite mushrooms. And I don't know that that's super cultivatable. That's like in your advanced arena. I think if they're even trying to cultivate it, those, so good, because they're like, you can make beef stroganoff without pasta and you use the mushrooms instead of the pasta. And as a carnivore / ketovore eater, that's perfect. Mushrooms are great to add to my ketovore diet because they're low carb, low glycemic impact, right? So, and they're delicious. So, the thing about it is I started seeing mushrooms everywhere. And I cannot find mushrooms for a long time. And then they'll make themselves known. It's almost a spiritual connection that the mushrooms make themselves known. And then I realized I've walked by that mushroom like 5 times. And I was just not in a calm, connected to nature mindset. And then the 6th time I walked by in a calm, connected to nature mindset, I'm like, there's that mushroom. And it's, a coral mushroom or fill in the blank. And I had to be in the mindset to see it. Like I wasn't really seeing what was around me because I was in my head thinking about things. So I know that I'm doing better emotionally and spiritually when I'm on a walk and I find mushrooms, because sometimes I'm on a walk and I'm walking by the mushrooms and not seeing them at all. And that connection to me is an interesting connection, right? It's like I got to get in the mushroom zone. So I found all of those kinds of mushrooms I've listed to you. And it took me 12 years to find my first morel. And I am confident they were here the whole time. And I will tell you that Tactical is a much better morel hunter than I am. Like when he finds them, I come out and I say, don't tell me where it is. Don't pick it. And then I find it. But I remember being so excited in 2020 when I found my first clutch of morel mushrooms, and then I like spread their spores all over the place because I was super excited. So yeah, that spiritual thing is a thing, and you will find some people are better at finding them. But there's also a pattern recognition thing, because when you look at a log or you look at the forest, you'll see disruptions in the pattern on a log. And it could be like a lichen growth, or it could be oyster mushrooms. Those are the ones that are most common here on the logs, unless it's turkey tail, which is very different. From a distant distance, lichen can look like an oyster mushroom bloom, but I can tell by the shape of the mushroom usually that it is not an oyster mushroom, so I don't have to walk up there. And I only developed that by walking up there, getting close and going, oh, that's a lichen, right? So that's part of the fun. So Carson says, help, I'm stepping into the mushroom zone. Yeah. So why? Oh, don't watch this. I don't think it's a coincidence that they're always depicted with gnomes or pixies. Yeah, I just like when you're closer to nature, you find more of the wild things. So, I mean, there was a joke here where I talk about my blasphemous thought of the week with Tactical, and he just grins when I say, because it's usually like, hey, I read this thing in the Bible and I have a question about it, and it's the question you're probably not supposed to ask, but I'm going to ask it because I just ask questions because I'm curious. And I said, my blasphemous thought of the week is like when you're trying to fathom God, right? And there's this like he exists outside of time and in multiple dimensions that we can't even like conceive of. We can conceive of like 4, maybe 5, and there are 10, and like there's all this stuff going on. And I realized, and it was after I was reading about this experiment where there was a miles long network of mycelium, which is like fungal network under the ground, and they exposed one side of it to a chemical or something, and faster or as fast of the speed of light, it registered on the other side. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. Like that speed of communication is something we haven't really figured out, right? So, and the way that they're able to sense from plants, it needs this nutrient and bring it to the plant is fascinating. So, I was like, Tactical, what if God's a fungus? And he just started laughing really hard. Anyway, I wasn't on mushrooms when I asked that question, but it was my blasphemous thought of the week. I haven't actually had one this week yet, so we'll see where that goes. I should actually start my like random other channel, because I always have new channel ideas on like what weird question I'm asking after reading the Bible, because people would either hate me for that or love me for that, but I think it would be interesting for some people. It's interesting for me anyway. Okay, so why did I decide then to stop hiking the woods and start growing mushrooms at home? And the answer is I didn't stop hiking the woods. I do hike it less lately because I have been diving into my business a lot. And we're going to have a lot of overlap about lessons learned from growing mushrooms and growing my business. So we'll just keep that there open as we go. I didn't give up foraging, and I like wild forage mushrooms, but you never know when you're going to find them. And I was roasting coffee. I had a failed roast, which means I had a whole bunch of coffee that was not going to go into bags for people, but is still organic matter. We also are powered by Holler Roast coffee at the Holler Homestead, which means that a lot of coffee grounds are produced here. Like we probably go through, Mom was astounded that she's like, I think we're going through a pound a day. I think we're going through a half pound a day. We're going through a lot more than most people. But there are multiple people drinking on it. And then one of them is Tactical, and Tactical drinks a lot of coffee. So, and we make it by the cup. So I was seeing all of this coffee waste stream, and I, throw it in the compost and dig it into the ground and sprinkle it around plants. And, it's not like it's getting thrown away, but it's a waste stream that I thought, I wonder if I could set up like a mushroom grow operation from this, because it's a lot of organic matter. It's not hard to keep it sterile. And I've been going down that path for many years, trying to just learn more about it in between things. But, I'll start a new project like the Self-Reliance Festival and not thinking about growing mushrooms at all when I'm thinking about growing Self-Reliance Festival. So I think that as this year has developed here on the homestead, and we've expanded what we're doing as part of the Holler Hub project and Base Camp Lodge, and looking at getting the buying club, the grocery buying club going, where we connect people with locally produced food. I started saying, okay, but how do we integrate mushrooms? And maybe if we do have that storefront set up, there's also space to grow mushrooms, and maybe people want to buy locally produced mushrooms. So of course we had to look at mushroom prices at the store to think about, like, can we make money on this? But also, does it make sense? Like, can we build the market for this? Because there's two sides of that, right? So I thought, well, if I can tap the waste stream of hollow roast coffee, grow mushrooms and sell mushrooms, I'm actually monetizing a waste stream. I'm also dealing with the waste. And it's a good story as part of Holler Roast, which is on a regenerative farm at this point, which is part of the revenue that we build from the regenerative farm, even though I'm not growing coffee here, but people like their coffee, right? And I think it's important to have a full culinary experience to your heart's desire. So I started trying to grow mushrooms, and understand that my other attempts to grow mushrooms involved finding oyster mushrooms growing on a box elder log somewhere, a tree that had fallen down, and having another box elder log nearby and like throwing it on that log, hoping it would cross pollinate, basically cross sporate, so to speak, and sporinate. There's probably an actual word for that. And then, a year or two later, usually within a year, I would get oyster mushrooms there too. Completely unpredictable schedule though. So, I think I just didn't research that much about how to home cultivate mushrooms. I just know that oyster mushrooms grow on stuff. And so I started inoculating the coffee with the spores, and it grew. And then I was like, well, how do I get to fruit? And I'm reading up, and they're like, you need to have wood chips involved. And then I got like fresh hardwood chips and mixed it with the coffee in a bucket and left it in the dark, which was probably one of my mistakes early on, and then tried to get it to fruit. And I grew maggots and mold. But the thing is, I did get the the mycelium was there. It was white. It just didn't fruit. And I was like, okay, so I'm doing something wrong. So I'm reading more on it. And I realized like the exposure to light was part of it. You need to have the humidity a little bit more balanced. And I was doing this in the height and the hottest part of summer in Tennessee. So what I had was, it was way too hot for the mushrooms, and they were outside, and then they were completely ignored basically when I went out of town. And you guys know I go out of town and I do speaking engagements or whatever. So part of it was that I didn't have the right ratio in my substrate, and I didn't manage the humidity and the temperature and all of those things very well. And then I also wasn't there to check on, do they need to be watered? Do they need, is something going wrong? Have they started growing maggots? Like whatever it is. So the lessons I got out of that is like an outdoor grow operation in Tennessee for something that wants it to be colder is not, with no humidity being managed, is not a good idea. And two, it needs to be automated or it's not going to happen. And that's, the repeated lesson we get on our homestead when we're building it with profit in mind. Like even if we have hired people doing roles here, it has to be repeatable what they're doing. It has to be broken down into the steps and in a way that's understandable, so they know what to do and how to do it and on what schedule and all those things. So without consistent systems, you're just growing frustration. And so my key takeaway from both of those things is it needs to automate, it needs to be predictable, and I need to have better temperature and other controls like climate controls for that in order to set the foundation for the mushrooms to grow themselves. And I realized in that moment, I'm not growing mushrooms. The mushrooms are growing themselves. I'm creating an environment for them to flourish. And if I fail at creating that flourishing environment, they don't flourish. And that's exactly the same for your business. You are not in there stronghorning it to make it happen, do or die. I mean, yes, you need that attitude, but you need to focus that do or die attitude on creating an environment and a system that grows, or else you'll just find frustration. And when you can't be there for 10 minutes, potential failure. So my mindset really shifted to how do I automate this? And I had been watching North Spore videos and people playing with Martha tents, and the North Spore one caught my attention in particular because it seemed to be enough of a quality that it would last long enough for me to be able to test if I can make this into a monetizable side hustle for my homestead. Versus and like the zipper wouldn't break and that sort of thing on the plastic, because there's a plastic covering on the tent. But it was also in an amount of money that wasn't like, okay, I just put $5,000 into a hard shelled room that's growing mushrooms. So and its footprint isn't like crazy, right? Carson said that same realization is true for kids too. Yes, it is. And animals. A lot of things can benefit from we are creating the environment in the system and not forcing it to happen. So I'd been kind of dreamily looking at the North Spore setup. I was out of town knowing that my mushrooms were going to fail once again because I was out of town for 10 days. And the other thing I liked about it is it came with the humidifier with the sensor. So it senses when it needs to humidify in the tent, and a fan that you can set on a time. I have timers, coming out the wang here from different things. And, it didn't come with a lighting system. And I think I'm going to be playing with learning more about lighting, but I have grow lights for growing seedlings and all sorts of other things anyway. So I was like, well, I got lights I can put in there. So it's automated, and like the humidifier is big enough. I now know it can go a week without me having to add water, which maybe in Arizona that timeline would be different. But yeah, so my decision after research was like, okay, let's try this automated system. And gee, I have this base amp I don't use. Maybe I can sell that and get the Martha tent. Well, full transparency, I did reach out to North Spore. I am an affiliate. If you use my link, I do get credit for it. And I didn't have to spend all of the money on the Martha tent. So I got my hands on one, and they were kind enough to sponsor that. So they also sponsored Self-Reliance Festival, which I really am thankful for. So, but for the purposes of this project, my price for the Martha tent is $450. I've seen them go as low as $400, but when they're on sale, it's about $400. You pay more when you get full price. You can get discount codes for them and bring the cost down. I know Jack's which doesn't give me credit for the sale, but Jack's membership brigade has a discount code. And I'm including that price because I'm doing this project about, can you grow mushrooms at home as a side hustle on purpose? And that means that can you spend $450 on a Martha tent and start buying grow blocks and start making money on mushrooms? And we haven't answered that question yet. We're down here. So the objectives of my project is, first of all, I would like to set up a system where we grow mushrooms and bring in revenue from the mushrooms as a side hustle income, while also providing ourselves with the mushrooms we want on a predictable schedule. Okay. That's like overall, just set up that system. And in part of doing that, we deal with a waste stream, hollow roast coffee, right? And we enrich the soil around us here, so it feeds back into the regenerative systems we already have in place. And that, my early goals are systematize it, make it work from a monetary standpoint, to develop sales channels that are replicatable in other markets so people can take this roadmap and do it for themselves when it turns into a roadmap. And then 3, be able to innovate into other kinds of substrates and tap into other waste streams that we may have here to integrate it into the regenerative work we do here. So that's basically what the overall project was. It's like Operation Mushroom Side Hustle is sort of how I think about it. And I think in order to do this, the mindset I needed to have wasn't how much is the startup cost? Because it's a price tag if you're going to get a Martha tent and all of that automation. It's how do I make it work with that startup cost? Because having the automation sets the foundation for being able to create the environment for the mushrooms to grow themselves, which is what we want, right? And so we learn about, in the environment the mushrooms need and that what they need, how we can get out of their way. Once we said that, it's like, get out of the way, let it happen. And then we learn how to monetize the fruits of those efforts, right? So I think the mindset change is, how do I make this work and how do we turn it into a profit as a side hustle or as a full-time business? And or maybe we make it a homeschool project for the kids, right? You could, if you have kids in homeschool, they can be going into something like this, learning how to track like the initial planning spreadsheet with numbers, market research on where and what messages seem to be working in their local market and how they're going to differentiate from other mushroom salespeople. It's not that saturated of a market where I am, but maybe it is where you are. And then all of the, like, you start bringing in the science. It's a whole nother layer, right? So how to create the right environment, those sorts of things. I think that for me, it's also fun. Like, it's very rewarding to have something just grow, especially when you know how many years I spent battling the climate in Tennessee in my vegetable gardens. I've finally cracked that nut, but it took me a long time and a lot of talk with locals to get that nailed, coming at gardening from an Oregon perspective in Tennessee. It's way harder in Tennessee. But we got it done. And I can tell you, biochar is part of that conversation. And I bet you biochar would help mushrooms. Another experiment to do. So the key mindset shift, though, is to ask yourself, how can I? And that's always the key, right? Eventually, if you get to the end of something and how can I didn't work and it's time to move on, you do. Like, it is healthy sometimes. We say never give up. Not true. Sometimes it's healthy to give up. Sometimes you discover, I don't like growing mushrooms. I love growing mushrooms. I love eating mushrooms. I love experimenting with recipes for mushrooms. So that is what it is. So some of the lessons I've had so far, because I've only been doing this for a really short time. Like, if you want to learn how to be an expert mushroom grower, I am not your person. You are coming with me on a journey right now as I finally do what I wanted to do for a number of years and start growing mushrooms at home, right? And it started with experimenting and failing and then going, I need to automate and I need to set up for success, because setting up for success is the way you learn how to do the thing. And even if it's not the ideal, scrappiest mushroom growing setup possible, what I got were mushrooms. So, don't watch as you can turn spent mycelium blocks into biochar. I'm going to end up doing that experiment. I actually have 2 I was about to bury in my garden, and I'll probably bury those, but I'll have 3 more oysters coming out when I get back from Jack's. And then I'm doing a whole nother deep dive. So some things that have gone wrong with the Martha tent is I just grew my first mold on my pink oyster mushrooms. So I grew pink oyster mushrooms successfully. And what I've discovered with the grow blocks is you can grow one bloom, takes a week or 2. And then you harvest them. And then usually I'll get a second bloom of whatever it is, especially for the beginner friendly mushrooms, which like oyster mushrooms and what are they called? Lion's mane is another beginning friendly one. And I've been sticking with beginning friendly, guys. We're on a journey. We're going beginner friendly and then saying, can I monetize beginner friendly? And what the reason that happened, and I actually did this to myself on purpose, is I did not sterilize all my tools, and I'm pretty sure there was something on the knife I used to cut into the grow block to cause the bloom to happen. And I didn't like sterilize my hands. And I know like all of the lessons say to do that, but I was like, but really, because I know in other situations sometimes it's not that. So my suspicion is I introduced a pathogen when I did that block. But I will say, having grown, 10 blocks, it's 1 out of 10. And that is a statistic you want to know. So then is it worth it to sterilize? Probably. Because then to recover from this, I of course immediately removed that block from the Martha tent. It is now compost, because compost fixes many ills, including moldy ills. Um, so one would think I should just sterilize all the time, but one would be wrong, because I know something that a lot of people don't know, and that is that lactobacillus in the air counteracts the growth of mold. So now I'm like, okay, I think it's time for me to make milk kefir near the Martha tent, so it's sucking in those healthy beneficial bacteria. Can we just establish a balance there? Now, if I get a second moldy block after doing that, I'll probably just cave and do what all the mushroom guys do, and like sterilize things better. But the second thing I'm doing is, once, because I have oysters in there right now. Not oysters, I have lion's mane in there right now. When my lion's mane is done, what I'm going to do is sterilize the whole and clean the whole Martha tent. And it's actually literally a month in and time for me to do that anyway. And I put it together not 100% correctly, because the North Spore Martha tent comes with like a little pan to catch any water, plus the tent, which goes around, including underneath the whole shelving unit. And you're supposed to put that little pan inside the tent and under the thing, and then anyway, I did it the wrong way. And that's because instead of following their instructions, which are very clear, I was trying to follow the instructions of the shelf itself. And if you get one, just know that each of the components comes with its own instruction manual with the component. That's not what you need to look at. What you need to do is pull out the beautifully illustrated, very clearly written instruction on how to make all these things work together that North Spore provides for you, which I didn't realize it was there, because I went into ADHD mode when we were building it, and then we found it at the very end, and I'm like, well, that would have been really helpful if I would have just started here. So I say that in case you get a Martha tent, that you do it the right way. So somebody says, I love this. This is why I started with indoor hydroponics. Yeah. So that exactly. I started growing lettuce indoors because I knew it would be helpful. Don't watch as I've built 20-foot by 12-foot raised beds with logs and mulch that's also full of mycelium. And it cut watering down to a third. Yeah, if you add biochar to that, it also cuts your watering down and also creates an environment where all your beneficials can live in your soil. And that's what we did with my raised beds this year. And they've done great. And it's the first year on them, so that's not their best year, right? Like by next year, they're going to be really humming. So from there, what I've been doing, lessons learned, is what do I do with spent blocks? Because my original plan was use that to inoculate new blocks. And then I learned that if you keep inoculating over time, it does reduce the success of blooming. And so now I'm like, I'm going to play with that too, right? But where we've been using them is I've just been burying the blocks in my garden, hoping it will make some other random mushrooms show up. The problem with that is if you're not confident in identifying your mushrooms and your wood chips on your garden bed, you could be growing other things. Like I'm not sterilizing wood chips that go on my outside garden bed. Maybe other really cool people do, but that means anything could be living there, right? Any fungal matter can be living there. And so when in doubt, don't eat it. That's my theory. As I said, oysters look very distinctive to me. And I just had an interesting mushroom grow that kind of looks like a wine cap-ish, but not quite the right color, but also under shade cloth it grew. Like the garden bed has shade cloth. And I sent a picture to my contact at North Spore, and I'm like, is this a wine cap? And he's like, I don't think so. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, it has all the elements of wine cap. but it's also old. And then by the time I was 3 days into this, it was dried. And he was like, "Send me more pictures." And I was like, at this point, the pictures are like, here's a dried mushroom that's an LBM, little brown mushroom. And it wasn't like the wine caps I've seen, like pictures, they tend to grow in bunches. This was a single mushroom. And I just decided, well, obviously, I'm not going to eat that. Okay. So there's your lesson. You don't eat that. It grew in a bed that was not my primary wine cap bed. But I had taken leftover spores and put them all over the place. So it could be anywhere. So until I have a successful one in the wine cap bed and see them in person and really get like that connection, I'm not going to start eating little brown mushrooms. But I am reusing spent blocks, and most of what I've been growing is oysters or lion's mane. So that just enhances the garden. I will also start adding them to my Johnson Sioux bioreactor compost systems that we've started using here since Jack Spirko got me all excited about it. And what I know is that can inhibit some of the microbiology initially, unless you give it more time. But I have this thing to compost, so I might as well use it. And then that means that I give it more time. And we've had such good luck with our compost here. I've thought about also monetizing that. Like, we have more compost than we can use a lot of times. Like, Tactical probably disagrees with me, but I'm looking at compost that's been here for 2 years that we haven't put anywhere, that we're just keeping up there, like, keep going, have a good life, sort of thing. So like, we could sell Ziplocs of that for people to make compost tea with, and they would totally kickstart their garden, especially if they've integrated things like biochar and like really balance their soil. Balance your soul, like the double meaning of my mushroom show. Getting started with mushrooms. Let them grow. Let them grow. Stop forcing it, guys. And that's, you know what? Everywhere on the homestead, like, when we stop forcing it, things work better. When we started working with nature and understood what permaculture was, things got way better. There's more better to be made here, but yes. So then what do you do with the mushrooms? And this is something, so I've talked to a lot of different mushroom growers at this point. Mushroom growers are like totally happy to share openly with you. And I haven't run into anybody's like, I don't know, I don't want you to be able to grow mushrooms because then you'll be my competition. Usually they're like, and another thing about mushrooms, right? So every person who ends up doing this seriously, who I see selling mushrooms at markets, has fresh mushrooms, dried mushrooms, and extractions for medicinal reasons. And then they start selling grow blocks and things like that. So that tells me something about how the side hustle develops if you push it. And it makes sense, because in order to have fresh mushrooms, you have to have enough to have them for sale, which means you'll have extras, which you can't just use on your own unless you like at a certain scale. And so then you dry them, and dried mushrooms have medicinal uses. And then you can do extractions from that unlocks different elements of the mushrooms, right? So that you have a different, like tinctures and whatnot. So it actually makes sense that when you start with one, you start stacking, right? The homestead revenue stack, all the different ways to make money with mushrooms. Or you talk to North Spore, where they started as a production facility for selling and growing mushrooms. And they totally ended up niching into providing spore and infrastructure for people, like the stuff. So I think that's kind of cool how they've gone as well. I don't think they sell a bunch of mushrooms, like actual consumer end mushrooms anymore. So hopefully we still have the sound. Just give me a 5 out of 5 if we do, because I had Zoom open for a meeting, and this is why I hate using Zoom for meetings, because then all of a sudden Zoom audio tries to hijack my show audio sometimes. And sometimes it just turns the mic off just for funsies and turns on what it refers to as a Zoom mic. There is no Zoom mic. So then I just become quiet. So give me a 5 out of 5 if you hear me. So, and this stumbles on to cook with what you have, which is, thank you, Michael. When you have something like mushrooms, like, what are you going to do with it? Well, you're going to cook it, right? Because every time I cook, I'm like, what am I going to cook? What do I have? Cook with what you have, right? This week, what I had were blue oyster mushroom blooms. I have the pink still to use tonight or tomorrow. The blue oysters bloomed, and it was their second fruiting. And so I harvested them, we cut them up, and that day was the day I decided a roast duck would be delicious for dinner. And so I did a dry rub on the duck and I roasted it, like lifted up from a cookie sheet. And about half an hour into cooking it, I took it carefully out and took the rack off and poured the fat into a thing. And there were some cracklings on there that had come off the duck onto the cookie sheet. And I put it back in for the rest of the time to cook it and took it back out and poured fat off. And I'm like, I think those are going to be charred if I leave them in there. So I scraped off the cracklings and put it in a separate thing. And then right before dinner, I diced up some onion and garlic and sauteed that up in some duck fat because I had the duck fat. It was right there. And I didn't add any spices beyond that. And I was about to salt it. And I was like, I tasted the cracklings by this point. And they were kind of salty from the dry rub on the duck. And I was like, instead of salt, I'm putting those in. And I threw those in. And wow. All I could say is, wow, it was so delicious, right? So that recipe was one way to use the oyster mushrooms. We'll just say that. So I've found it very easy to integrate the fresh mushrooms into our food because we're not producing at a scale like I could eat mushrooms every day, first of all. And then secondly, we're not producing at a scale where I'm worried about using them up. I am about to get all of the lion's mane at one time because I bought 2 fruiting blocks this month. And then my one that I had from before, because lion's mane grows more slowly than oysters. Somehow they're all fruiting at one time. I'm getting a second fruiting on my other lion's mane. It's not as big as the other ones, but it's time to do lion's mane before I go to Jack's. And I've been trying to perfect that, like really cook them down till they're dried and seared. So it's like a steak-like flavor sort of thing. I haven't perfected that yet, but it's still good. And I have done lion's mane more as a fish or crab adjunct. But yeah, so cooking with the mushrooms is the easiest thing. Now, you could set up a system where you dry them or you can freeze them. There's like lots of ways you can preserve them. I'm just getting into that, so I don't know. But my goal is nothing wasted. And I know that mushroom powder is something people use medicinally as well, especially something like lion's mane. But then I was listening to a show and I think lion's mane, you have to extract in an alcohol base in order to get the full impact of the elements in there that help with some of the inflammation it is said to help with. Listen, YouTube, I'm not trying to spread medical misinformation, but I do use a Berkey water filter, so maybe we'll get a strike for me saying the word Berkey on my show. Anyway, but eating them is also part of it, right? Like, so you eat the things from nature and they have benefits, like your nutrition is a benefit thing. So the cooking has been all I've needed to do, and I'm finding other ways to use them as we have surplus, but with hungry rednecks around, I'm not finding a surplus yet. I'm hoping what will happen over time as I integrate the spent blocks into my garden and other places on the property, that we will end up with outside property grown random mushroom blooms, which requires us going outside to look for them. So the cooking payoff is big though. And I don't know if we're going to integrate any of my mushrooms in the farm to table dinner because I don't know if I'll have a bloom, but I am ordering oysters as I leave town under the hope that we have an oyster bloom in time for the farm to table dinner. And I know with the chef who's coming, I can just be like, here's some oyster mushrooms. And he can be like, great, cook. And it's done. So that's the glory of working with a chef on something like that. So I don't know. So mushrooms are amazing. And part of what's amazing is they grow themselves. If all you have to do is set the foundation for them and they grow themselves. And what we're doing with the side hustle now is predicting timelines so we know on what schedule we will have mushrooms so that I can tap it into a market. So I moved on to How do I talk about the mushrooms? How do I tell people to cook them? So developing recipes and sharing recipes with people and getting them to taste it in features like the farm to table dinner and saying, okay, now how much money can we make off of that while also having enough mushrooms to eat that we're growing, right? So I think it's going to be a fun little adventure. I will have a show from time to time as I collect data to share with you guys how things are going. I do know with the purchased blocks, I can sell and make a little bit of money based on the volume I'm getting off the blocks. However, if I can find a ways to stretch how those blocks grow by, I don't know, using them to inoculate a bunch of straw or other growing media, I stand to have a better profit margin. And that's where we're going next, is that experimentation with the coffee waste stream plus expanding the benefit of one, either sawdust, bag of sawdust spore or one grow block to create enough production that it makes it worth it, right? So, I don't know. I mean, when you're walking in the woods and you find a mushroom that's edible, it's grown itself, you did nothing. Like you went for a walk and you harvested a mushroom, right? And that's what we're trying to recreate at my house in the Martha tent that we have from Northspore. And I just want it to be a space where mushrooms show up, right? And it just kind of goes back to that whole thing where you set that environment and it nurtures that growth. And if you think about it, that's what we all need to do for our lives, for our families, for our business, and for ourselves. So I just think it's a fun little thing that we're working on. And systems thinking really helps there as well. So I really think, like you may be like, yeah, I want to grow mushrooms with you, Nicole, and we'll share best practices. And I'd love that if anybody does want to do that. But even if your thing is not mushrooms, maybe your thing is microgreens, or maybe your thing is pork, or I don't know what your thing is. Whatever your homestead wants to produce or your business is producing, not tactical gear like at SOE, right? Um, Maybe it's time to stop trying to force something to happen and take a step back and look at what environment do I need to create for this to work as a system and for this to work naturally, for the good stuff to show up. Because if you can set it up that way, right, then it's easier, A, to bring people in to help you as you scale, and B, it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more fun. And you're not just fighting it the whole way, because why should it be a fight? There's no reason for it to be a fight if you're creating something beautiful. It may be hard work, but it does not need to be a fight. And I think that's the key lesson I've had after my first month growing mushrooms at the Holler Homestead. Also, the duck recipe, big benefit. Can't ignore the duck recipe. I actually just told Tactical, I'm like, I think we need some more ducks from Emily, because we might be eating a lot more ducks all of a sudden. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed the show today. And if you did, I want to remind you, you can get involved with our community on Telegram. It's at LFTN group on Telegram, or you can go to the Living Free in Tennessee Coffee Break group on Facebook, and we talk about things. The Telegram group is currently the most active, but if people are on Facebook and start talking, it becomes active. And this year, Margot is coordinating a Christmas stocking exchange. You need to get your form filled out at livingfreeintennessee.com for that by Friday, because on Saturday-ish, or sometime shortly after Saturday, she plans to assign you your secret stocking Santa, right? So we are assigning you your person. The form asks you some preferences like colors and scents and whatever. And then you're expected to mail a stocking for $20 or less to your person on December 1st, so everybody can have the wonder of Christmas morning and having a fun stocking to open. Be sure to sign up for that. If you like the show, want to support the work we're doing here, get your coffee at hollerroast.com and consider becoming a member. Our next member webinar is going to be So I bought a whole pig. Now what? And it'll be about some of the things you may want to know if you're buying whole and half animals. That'll be over at livingfreeintennessee.com. With that, go out, make it a great week.